So we are waiting for questions from the audience. We talked with you already. Could we just hear Mr. Lutskanov? Thank you very much, Mr. Nedyalkov. I'm an officer from the reserve. I've been working in the army, in the headquarters of Brussels. And with this, I want to just say that I know the mechanism of how decisions are taken, and the major motto here of the army. I will just make a comment and a question to all the panelists, but my comment is concerning the communique in connection with the re-establishing the dialogue between NATO and Russia. At the end, it's written that never the relationship between NATO and Russia would be the same after the situation in Ukraine. I think that we have not to look for a sensation that after every crisis and challenge, the development supposes another level of equal balance. So right now, the conditions that we are living now in the Black Sea region, what is the development of those challenges, we will never go back to the same media, the same environment like 50 years ago. So the question I have now, when I was hearing the panel, here we have more people that are working in policy. So what is your opinion? After the 19th, all of us are convinced, even the military organization, that the security is a multi-level notion. So the defense is a very key factor of security. So the last 2 years, when we fighting with crisis, and especially at the moment, again we're going back to the position of defense, just showing a boundary. Mr. Bojilov said that probably in the future the Black Sea region would be the boundary between NATO and Russia. We want to do something united here on the Black Sea region to oppose Russia. So the question is, to what extent we should focus on the defense component of the Euro-Atlantic organization, helping? What does it help with? Or is it a challenge to other components in the region, economic, culture, and friendship relationships? So if it's an obstacle for that, what would be the consequences? And because we have an escalation of this on the two parts, to exclude someone, to reject the global world, and by rejecting the global world, what are we achieving? And now or to humiliate the other part to such extent that it would be under us. So not only with Russia, but with every country, with every person, we should talk. And when we try to subject someone, this other one would defend himself. Would you like to say something?
Yes, I would like to say a few words concerning what he said. Of course, security is related to all other sections and spheres of life, policy and economy, so this is why we need to solve this problem with security by a dialogue and communication. The matter is how our actions are conceived by the other part. So that's why it's very important what NATO would do about the security, but the other part would have to understand our actions the way they are, so that problems would not escalate and increase. Yes, now we do have some countries, members of NATO, which have communicated their concern about their territorial unity. NATO as an organization would have to answer such challenges. The problem is how all this is going to be communicated, and all the decisions that are to be taken in Warsaw, for example, as capacity and forces in East Europe. This would be an element that would calm down the countries in the East, but on the other hand, this should not be conceived as and understood as an action against countries that are not part of the organization and the alliance. This is why understanding is very important on both parts.
Thank you. Of course, dialogue is important in international relations, and especially dialogue between opposing parties are very important. However, you have to know also what the other party is intent to in order to achieve the results that you want to achieve. As far as I'm concerned, I believe Russia is preparing for the repetition of Cold War-like confrontation throughout the world, and kind of a stalemate and post-imperial domination in the Russian near abroad, including the Black Sea area. It sees the Black Sea area in a very clear geopolitical perspective, interest of areas of control, influence, dominance, territorial gains and losses. There is no amount of dialogue that will convince Russia to withdraw its troops from Crimea. I don't believe there is enough amount of dialogue that it will convince Russia to withdraw from Abkhazia or South Ossetia. So we have to keep that in mind, as long as we have to keep the dialogues open as well. But you have to be prepared that militarily and defensively so that dialogue can work. Otherwise, it won't. Thank you.
Благодаря на вице-адмирал Люцканов.
I thank Mr. Lutskanov. Well, obviously the balances would be achieved on different levels, higher or lower levels of confrontation. Whether this would bring to some escalations and problems or not, I of course would side to the lower level of confrontation. According to me, it is also very important concerning keeping the dialogue open, as I am related to the synergy of the Black Sea region from its beginning, from its very start. Frankly speaking, I do not really think the pre-orientation was a very good idea. The pre-orientation from including to excluding concept as a major priority of our partnership. Professor Panayotov, I would just like to add a few words to that. Dear colleagues, well, it is obvious that NATO as an organization once again shows liveliness and relevance better than the European Union once again, as it actually concerns the relations with Russia as they should be. according to me, the European Union should really find grounds to further the coordination of the European Union countries concerning key problems, not just to security, related to security, but also other key factors and topics under discussion. Otherwise, the European Union, if it is not adequately relating to the problems, threats, and challenges in the short term, it would put a risk to the security of all members. Maybe there is time for one last question, because we're ahead of time already. Be brief. Thank you very much. I'm Plamen Energy Independence Organization. I would just like to say, to add a few words related to the words of Professor Mustafa Aydin. He was the only one among all the speakers who mentioned the post-imperial dominance, on behalf of Russia in the Black Sea region. And I would just like to remind to all present here something that they remember well during the 60s and back into the 70s, during the Cold War, when in the so-called Warsaw Agreement and the socialistic agreement, we talked about only American imperialism. China, I remind you, China used the term Russian hegemony as a term, so that they would warn us that there is another world player who would like to undermine all the importance of all other countries in worldwide. So I really am skeptical about the idea of having dialogue with Russia. Now, I think that Professor Nikitin would also like to bring up another question.
I come from Moscow, from Russia, Alexander Nikitin. I agree with my Turkish colleague that the dialogue is important at any moment, but I disagree that Moscow wants another Cold War. Definitely not. There is definite change of momentum between the situation 2 years ago and now. When in 1999 NATO bombers were bombing Belgrade, NATO lawyers told us in Moscow that this is exception. Accept it and it will never be repeated. The same probably Russia is sending as a signal now. Crimean episode was an exception and it will not be repeated. The modern political, psychological situation in Moscow is definitely not in direction of another adventures of this type. More than that, yesterday, exactly yesterday, it was the session of the NATO-Russia Council in Moscow after 2 years break. And both sides, both Brussels politicians and Moscow politicians, agreed that this re-establishment of dialogue between Russia and NATO in the format of NATO-Russian Council works. We agreed to meet again in July for the next session. Very professional points were scheduled for debates. No ideology, very technical things, less interference in the Black Sea area, the confidence-building measures, etc. This is why, let me finish with what I started with. I agree with those colleagues who expressed the opinion that even in very difficult times, we need to talk to each other to avoid misperceptions. In fact, we all countries, Russia and the West, NATO, Bulgaria, we all are aiming at stability, and this is very, we can provide it together. Thank you.
Остава да благодарим на
We would like to thank once again, express our gratitude to all the participants of this panel for your participation, the interesting questions that you brought up, and all the analysis made so far. Now we would like to, we're ahead of time too much, but now you can go to the other hall for a very brief buffet time, coffee break, and then after 15 minutes we would come back for the next panel.